and it's projected to last for another year into '08. And that will be the longest sustained period of losses in jobs in the state's history. Even the Great Depression had a couple of years where jobs actually went up a little. Now, it isn't as bad as the Great Depression. Our unemployment rate's 7%. In the Great Depression, it was 30-some%. So it's
that's comforting, Tom.
That's comforting. But we do have a high unemployment rate, and we continue to lose jobs. And the jobs we're losing tend to be high-paying jobs. Manufacturing, we've lost a fourth of our workforce in manufacturing. And those jobs pay 2 or 3 or 4 times as much as many other jobs. They spend money in their communities. They stimulate the economy in their communities and help the local businesses with the purchases that they make. They pay taxes, and because their incomes are higher, they can spend more and in the process pay more taxes, and they pay more income tax and everything else. So those job losses have translated to a significant portion of the revenue problem that the state has.
Can we talk a little bit about why Michigan seems to be so far behind our other states? I mean, I communicate a lot with colleagues from other states, especially within the Great Lakes region, and they tell me they're fighting over how to spend their surpluses.
Well,
now, they don't have a lot of surplus, but they're fighting over that. That's where their arguments lie, not on where to cut next, as we unfortunately have been doing here in Michigan.
Yeah, I think what you're describing is the most common situation in states around the country. They have had, they've been proceeding carefully because the national economy was weak, but as the economy picked up, they were careful about the expenditure decisions that they made, and the revenues for the most part have been exceeding expectations. So you're right, they are fighting, quarreling, debating what to do with the excess. In the case of our state, we're the only state in the country that's had a year-to-year, that's still showing year-to-year declines in employment, for example. Every other state in the country is growing. It's been called, our situation's been called a single state recession, and I think that's a very apt description of the pickle that we're in. And the prospect for growing out of this situation is virtually nil. Our economy is not likely to be strong enough to generate the revenue growth that would be sufficient to cover the spending pressures that confront state government, principally health care. Health care is the biggest.
So the spending level that we have had as a state government here in Michigan is at this time not sustainable with the economy that we have, with the revenues that we have coming in, with our overall economic engine here
That's
in the
correct.
state.
And that's after huge cuts.
Right.
The state's general fund, which pays for those 4 big areas that I mentioned, and not to diminish the fact that it also pays for our courts and our state police and civil rights and environment programs and things like that, the state will receive less money in general fund revenues this fiscal year than it did 11 years ago in actual dollars. Forget about inflation. Inflation over 11 years would probably be at least a third or so. But just in actual dollars, there's less money to cover all those important programs than 11 years ago. So our public universities and community colleges have been cut substantially, and that translates to tuition increases for the students to try to recoup those losses. But
So you've just synthesized our problem in your statement, that we have been, because of where we are today, we are behind where we were 7 years ago. And we're talking basically, well, the same or less services, because you're right, we have, in the last 2 or 3 years, we've cut a lot of services, cut back on a lot of services.
We've cut
they are
on
not
services,
being fully funded.
But what happens is over 80% of all the money that comes through the state treasury goes somewhere else to some other organization that actually is in the business of providing the services. They're mostly governmental, so it goes to our cities and villages and townships and counties, and they've been cut by about 30% on average over this period. It goes to universities and community colleges and school districts, and also to hospitals and physicians who are actually the providers of services for Medicaid, to community mental health programs, which are creatures of the counties. The state retains less than 20% to actually employ state employees that provide services as well, and the biggest area is corrections. But the effect of all of this is that we're seeing reductions in local government spending. A recent survey showed that there are 2,000 fewer police officers in the state now than before the cuts began, 3,500 fewer firefighters. This was a municipal league survey.
So 2,000 fewer police officers and 3,500 fewer firefighters statewide. And as a result of basically cuts in revenue sharing to our local communities.
And revenue sharing also affects the parks and the other things that local government is in the business of doing. But public safety is arguably maybe the highest priority that a local government can have. And that's where the rubber hits the road. $600 million worth of cuts in revenue sharing, and then you have 5,000 to 6,000 fewer employees who are in the business of public safety.
And I should remind our viewers, or tell our viewers, that we are showing charts at various times during our conversation as we talk about the state's budget to help them, hopefully help them understand better what we're talking about. So you'll be seeing charts on your screen intermittently as Tom Clay and I talk about Michigan's budget. Well, you know, as we talk about the problems that we have meeting the needs of the people of the state, obviously there are people who say, I don't want to pay any more taxes. I don't want to send any more money to Lansing. Patty, don't increase my taxes. And we've also heard a lot about structural deficits, structural problems. And let me also remind the viewers that we in Michigan have a constitutional amendment, which I am happy to support, I stand by strongly, that says we have to have a balanced budget. We cannot deficit spend as the federal government can. And a lot of people confuse that because they think that if the feds can deficit spend, the state can. But we don't print money in the basement of the Capitol, so we don't deficit spend. So when we talk about a deficit, it means there is a deficit on the books now, but we're not going to fully fund whatever it is going forward until we know that we have the money. And if we don't have the money, then we're going to have to do cuts. So bottom line is, we're not going to deficit spend in this state. We haven't in the past, and we aren't going to do it in the
I'd reinforce that. We've had 6 years of structural deficits, and with a bad economy piled on top of it, the budget has been balanced every year by the legislature and two different governors during this period of time. So the hard decisions that have had to be made in those last 6 budgets have been made, and the budgets have been balanced.
Thank you for pointing that out too, because I think that's important for viewers to understand. Well, can we talk, we just have a few minutes left in this section of our program, but can we talk for just a couple minutes about the structural deficit and what the definition is of a structural deficit going forward, and if you see ways to deal with it so we can get rid of that problem?
Well, a structural deficit's a fairly easy concept. You have a structural deficit when the costs of continuing programs and policies on a year-to-year basis are increasing faster than revenues do, even when the economy is performing well. Now, we're in a poorly performing economy now, so we also have a cyclical deficit on top of the structural deficit. Cyclical deficit being one that's caused by a bad economy. And if anything, it not only diminishes the revenue performance, but it increases some pressures on the spending side, and it certainly doesn't decrease any pressure. Same number of kids come to school, whether you're in a strong economy or a weak economy, so your customers are still there. You just have less money to provide the services. But we have this structural deficit, and it's caused by a weakening connection between the economy that we're in the 21st century and the tax structure that we crafted as citizens beginning in the 50s, 60s, and on through the 70s, essentially.